Okay, looks like we're live. Hello and welcome to Entrepreneur TV. I am your co-host, Velma Gallant. Super excited to have you here today. We have another very special guest to share with you today. Today's show title is Becoming Burnout Proof with Coach Ellen. I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your name.
It's okay. I was gonna say the Y's there just to mess you up. It's Ellen.
Right? So this is going to be a really fascinating topic. This is something that I'm quite passionate about as well. So this is going to be fantastic. Ellen is a former research scientist turned to the #1 burnout and stress management coach on Google and creator of the Burnout Proof Members Club and the Burnout Proof Business Signature course. She is on a mission to help high achieving women, coaches, solopreneurs, and content creators work less and live more, and has been featured on stage with LinkedIn and in print with Brains Magazine. Welcome to the call, Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I love talking about this topic.
Same, right? It's actually a real. I got my notebook ready.
I love
This is
that.
going to be good. So the first thing that I talked about when I shared your bio is that
Mhm.
you were a research scientist. So I'm not seeing the dots connecting between research scientist and an entrepreneur that helps women with burnout.
There really are very few dots. And for an extended period of time, I was trying so hard to distance myself from my past life as a scientist. Sorry, I feel like my camera is like glitching out here. Focus camera. Um, but yeah, I feel like I tried to put distance between those two worlds for a really long time. But actually, the point of overlap is that my research and my background is in immunology, the study of your immune system, and what is more intimately linked to stress and our stress response than our immune system. So I've actually only in recent years, since I started doing this work, really started leaning into the fact that I am a scientist. I can read research articles and for the most part understand them. They are definitely very technical at times, and sometimes I'm even, have trouble to understand them, but it gives me a leg up in a lot of ways because I can keep the work that I do very, very grounded in evidence, which is really, really fun. But the moral of the story
Mm,
is I have arrived at this work because I burned out in graduate school and Google was unhelpful. So I had to do what scientists do best, and I had to research the living heck out of burnout and
mhm.
stress and understand and almost like experiment with myself. And then in the future, start experimenting with clients and see what actually worked and what didn't work. So I think me not only having the background of a scientist and being able to, really, really understand the science behind what I'm teaching, but also to have the background of a scientist in terms of experimenting and being willing to test out stuff, it's helped me a lot in being a
Mhm.
coach, and frankly I think it helps me a lot still to this day to research and to help my clients find the patterns in what's working and what's not working in their lives.
Well, certainly transferable skills, without a
Yes.
doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. So our in my opinion, our world has basically primed us, trained us to go into burnout and be kind of proud of it.
Yes. Yes.
What are your thoughts on, well, I guess the biggest question is how do we untrain ourselves for this? How do we
Oh.
untrain ourselves for burnout? Because it seems like we're living in a world that if you're not going full on all the time, then there's something wrong with you. You're bad.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and simultaneously, like if you're not going all out all the time, pedal to the metal, and you do burn out, that somehow that means you're weak. And I
Mm,
remember one of the first times I said that in a speaking engagement, that burnout does not equal weakness. Somebody commented that right there, just knowing that and just hearing that was in and of itself worth them attending the workshop. But in terms of the how, I say all the time in my work that when I'm working with clients, when I'm doing speaking engagements, any of that stuff, we're breaking decades worth of bad habits. And I think that's a really, really important thing to know going into it, that I'm not a fan of band aid solutions and I'm not aiming for quick fixes here. I'm not helping you. And that's why I really changed a lot of how I talk about this too. I want you to become burnout proof. I don't want you to just overcome the season of burnout that you might be in. And make no mistake, for a lot of high achievers, it is a season. There's a cyclical nature for a lot of us to burn out, especially high achievers and high performers, because we do just have a tendency to overwork, whether it's because we're bought into cultural conditioning or just because that's our own MO. I feel like there's a lot of personality types that are just very prone to
Mm,
burnout. So there is like, we have to know that going in. We have to know that you're playing a long game here. Like, and that's where almost stepping into that scientist mentality too, just as an individual, is important, because we've got to understand that we've got to experiment and see what works for us, because what works for me might not work for you. So I think that's thing one, is realize it is decades worth of bad habits we are breaking, and we've got to be
mhm,
patient with the process of overcoming them. But I think the other side of it, and I think one of the core pieces of this, is we have to start thinking in terms of creating sustainability in our life. I teach what I call my sustainable success framework, which is to overcome burnout and to become burnout proof, we need to have sustainable systems, because we have so much information being thrown at us day in and day out. No matter what people are doing, no matter what industry or field that they are in, there is a lot of information that we have to juggle. And we have to
mhm,
have systems that can juggle that information. I operate a lot from, and actually, this might surprise a lot of people, I am a solopreneur by heart and by nature. I actually don't want a team. I might have a VA at some point in my future. So I delegate a lot to technology. I don't delegate a lot to people. So I think having systems that run a lot of things in the background that you don't have to have your hands in is a super, super important switch for us. And I think a lot of people are a little averse to that because they don't feel like they're like tech savvy, but it's really not as hard as you think, and everything is Googleable. So, sustainable systems, I find, is a really, really important thing for people to construct for themselves. But I
mhm,
also think, and I think these are two very fundamental shifts that we have to make when it comes to how we think about things, is we also have to have sustainable self care and a sustainable mindset. And when I say sustainable self care, what I mean when I say that is twofold. Sustainable self care means, one, your self care has to sustain everything that you're doing. I actually don't think burnout is solely about overwork. I think you can work a lot and avoid burnout purely because you're intentionally making the decisions to pour back into yourself in whatever way that might look. So, sustainable self care is that it is
mhm.
pouring back into yourself in a way that you can sustain the level of work that you're doing. But sustainable self care also means, this kind of the second aspect of it, your self care in and of itself has to be sustainable. And I think that is a thing a lot of us do wrong when it comes to self care. Like, I am guilty of it too, where if you ask me, like, oh, Ellen, what's your ideal morning routine? I will probably list off like a dozen things at least that I want to incorporate into my morning routine. Ask any person, like, what's their, yeah, I'm assuming it's the same for you. Like, if I think about all the self-care activities I want to do in a day, it ends up being this laundry list of self-care
Right?
activities, and that is not sustainable. And as soon as I started realizing that about how I approach self-care and started teaching it to my clients, that was a huge shift in terms of how they approach their self-care.
So I really like that sustainable self-care aspect that you're talking about here. I have morning routines. I
Mhm.
love my morning routines.
Mhm.
And I have found a couple of ways that helps me to get more in that time is I call it habit stacking.
Mhm.
And I will do things, multiple things at one time. So
Mhm.
I will meditate, do red light therapy, my grounding mat, all
Mhm.
in the same
Mhm.
15 minutes. I will
Mhm.
do visioning
Mhm.
and mantras
Mhm.
while I'm on my treadmill.
Mhm. Do I have
So,
permission to challenge that for a second? I love all of
yes,
that. I think all of that's
yes.
true. But what I want to challenge actually is, you started that with saying, I've come up with a way to do more in this time. Why do we need to do more in that time?
I think what it was for me, and I love this question. What it was for me is these are the things I wanted to achieve. I
Hmm.
knew I had X amount of minutes in
Hmm.
order to achieve them.
Hmm.
And so I was like, how can I blend some
Hmm.
things so that I'm maximizing that time?
Yeah.
And yes, it was and these were things, so the meditating and the treadmill were things that I already had going.
Hmm.
And so it's like, can I use these
Yeah.
for more? Can I use these for more? Not
Yeah.
necessarily, I have to figure this out in order to do that. It was, how can
Exactly.
I? right?
I think that's a
So,
better mentality because I do feel like I run victim to the how can I do more in my morning routine time. And I actually realized earlier this year when I was kind of redesigning my routines, if I ask myself what do I want to do during that time, that's when it almost starts to become overwhelming in and of itself. So instead of asking myself what I want to do during that time, I started asking myself, okay, how do I want to feel during my morning routine? Like how what do I want my
mm,
morning routine to feel like? And that was a really interesting question to ask because it made me realize that there's multiple ways in which I could get that. I want to feel rejuvenating and energized, but I also live in the Seattle area. And as much as I might want to go outside and get a walk every single morning, I'm not going to want to do that when it's raining outside. Like, even though I'm born and raised in this area, I still don't want to go out for a walk when it's pouring down rain. So I had to have alternatives and options that still gave me that feeling of rejuvenation and energizing my morning that weren't that. So it's almost like I gave myself like you almost think of it like a buffet of options in the morning, and I
mm.
can pick and choose that morning which one's going to fill that aspect of my morning routine. And I think that was a really really important shift for me personally to make because otherwise I can easily turn my morning routine into this 2-hour routine that I then shame myself for if I don't do it perfectly that day. And so I think that was the shift that I had to make. I think the biggest thing when it came to my self-care routines is focusing more on how it feels instead of what I'm doing and also making sure my self-care routines were adaptable. Some mornings you're going to wake up late. I actually perhaps stupidly had scheduled 2 interviews today and I got home at 1:30 a.m. last night. I was at a conference yesterday. And so like this morning when I woke up, I'm like, okay, I don't have time and I nor do I want to do my like entire normal morning routine, but I've constructed my morning routine in a way that it adapts to how much time I have. I may not meditate for 15 minutes, but I'll at least spend a minute in silence. So like that I think is another way to think about our routines. Are they adaptable to the time that we have and to the schedule that we have that day because you're not always going to have a perfect schedule in front of you.
See, and that leans into the sustainable mindset that you
Mhm.
spoke of, right? Because
Mhm.
I recognize that. I happened to give myself a shin splint this week. So, and I do have, so I have a treadmill for those rainy days, or,
Mhm.
those snowy
Same.
days like up here. If it's a beautiful sunny morning, I'll go out and I'll walk outside
Mhm.
instead. So then I get my mantra and my walk. And sometimes I
Mhm.
even just leave off the mantra and just let my mind be
Yep.
silent through it. So there's that. And then there's also, because I've got the shin splint, walking is, I'm supposed to take a break from that. So
Mhm.
switched it up to doing stretching instead,
Yes.
right? So yeah, being willing to be flexible with it, knowing that
Mhm.
I want to give myself
Mhm.
these things, but being
Mhm.
flexible. And one of those things that I haven't habit stacked is my journaling.
Mhm.
That when I'm journaling, I'm just journaling. It's not really
Yeah.
much I can do with it anyways. I
It's true. That's a
probably
hard
would
one to
have
habit
tried to
stack.
find something, but
No, I'm with you. And I like that you journal because like we're even touching on the different things that we're touching on as forms of self-care. Gets into something that's completely different, but there's different forms of self-care. And I actually feel like one of the biggest things that can create burnout, we're going to touch on that more as we get into mindset and some of the other stuff, is a lack of emotional processing. And that's why I'm a big fan of
Mm.
journaling. One of the biggest reasons why I think we get emotionally burned out and emotionally exhausted is we're not making space to process our emotions. Journaling is my favorite way to do that. And honestly, if you're not a journaler, you can literally like vent to your voice memos on your phone. Like you can audio journal, you can talk it out because some of us are verbal processors and some of us are written processors. So like there's variations on that, but I think I love that you make space for that because I think that's powerful for stress is making sure you're emotionally processing.
One of my coaches 20 years ago
Hmm.
had a process, and I love this process, and I do share it with my clients as well. Um, she called it the okay, profanity alert, a diva bitch walk. And it was basically going for a walk and vocalizing everything that you have to complain about, getting it all out. And what I found and what she found was that by doing that, by the time I get to the end of my walk, I am declaring what I want with as much passion as I was complaining at the beginning of it.
Hmm. I love that. I've never heard of anything like I've definitely had my fair share of Dude, the next time I live with somebody, I'm single, so I live by myself. But the next time I live with someone, they're gonna laugh because I will have like full blown conversations in the shower. If I'm like frustrated with somebody, I'll be like in the bathroom getting ready, and I'm like, I'm talking it out. I'm like, I'm mad at you. And I think, yeah, it's so important. Like we gotta externalize it. I feel like that's the biggest reason why a lot of us get emotionally exhausted is because we're holding it in. We're trying to be like,
Mhm.
good women. We're trying to be quiet. We're trying to be in the background. We're trying not to step on anybody's toes. I'm from the West Coast and I got told that we have such thing called West Coast nice. I think that's another form of it is
Mhm.
we are very almost to our detriment, like diplomatic and feel like we always need to be like nice about everything. Like sometimes you've just got to let yourself go into, like you said, profanity alert, full bitch mode. Sometimes you just have to let yourself because I think inauthenticity can burn you out more than anything else. And if you're
Mhm.
holding in something you want to say constantly, there's a lot of
Right?
emotional exhaustion that can come with that, for sure. I love that.
Ab Absolutely, and I may have adapted that to my car, so I'd have diva bitch drives.
Yeah. My car's become like my silent sanctuary. I actually, unless I'm going on a longer drive, if I'm just going to the grocery store or like down to my little favorite waterfront spot where I like to go for walks, I actually tend not to listen to music because that's actually another thing that a lot of us burn out from is just sensory overload. Like there's just
Mm,
stimulation around us constantly and giving yourself sensory rest. That's one of my favorite forms of rest is sensory rest. And that's one of the ways I get it is when I'm doing a short drive, I just don't turn on the radio. It's actually also really nice if you have an old car like me, because then you can start to hear the clunks if they're happening in your car. So, bonus.
yes, yes, 100%, 100%. So now when you were talking about creating sustainability,
Mhm.
I thought you said more than the three items we've touched on. We've touched on system, self-care, and mindset.
Yeah.
Did you say there were more
No,
parts
it's
of
really just the
this?
three pillars.
Okay.
But I'd love to get into mindset a little bit more because
Okay.
how I define a sustainable mindset, and I think this is really important for people who are entrepreneurs and business owners, but I think it's important for everybody, but it's really important for that subset. A sustainable mindset is a mindset that is going to carry you through the tough times. That is what I believe a sustainable mindset is about. And I feel like it is about emotional processing. It is about, all those things that we were touching on a second ago. But I actually feel like one of the biggest things when it comes to having a sustainable mindset is knowing your core values, knowing
Mhm.
what your definition of success is, like knowing whose opinion actually matters in your business and your life. And that's honestly just scratching the surface, but like those are some of the highlights of what it means to have sustainable success. Like I feel like a lot of us, and like the values one is something that I'm super passionate about because I feel like a lot of us, we might know our values, but I do, and I might ruffle some feathers saying this. I feel like a lot of us choose values that we feel like we should have and that aren't actually truly core values. And I will nitpick this one because I hear this one a lot. An example of that is family. A lot of
Mhm.
people say, I value my family. And I mean, that's wonderful. Like, I love that you love your family, but I actually don't think for a lot of us, the thing that we value is our family. Like one of my values is not family. My value, I call it my relational value because it's something that I always look for in my relationships is actually belonging. It's not my family that I value. It is the fact that I feel like even on my worst days, I still have a safe place with my family. They still love me even when I'm not showing up at my best. And it's the same thing with my friendships. I have people who get me, people who, even when you don't articulate something well, they know what you mean. They speak your language. That to me feels like belonging. And that is how I articulate it. And that's what the value truly is for me. So like I love doing values work. It's funny, it's not the thing that I'm most known for with my clients. I'm known for the systems because I'm kind of a productivity ninja. I love
Mhm.
that. But I love doing the values work and the emotional work because I feel like that's the stuff a lot of us gloss over because we don't see the values of it. But make no mistake, like values conflicts, one of the biggest things that it might be driving burnout in your life. 100%. Like I'm really passionate about that one.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense because I know that I mean I kind of have the same opinion when it comes to purpose, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people will say that their purpose is their family.
Mm-hmm.
That's their why. So I guess more really about whys.
Mm-hmm.
Their why is their family. However, I would say that the why is deeper than the family, and the family is an expression of it. So what I heard was
Yes.
the family is an expression of belonging more so than
Hmm.
the value itself.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. Yeah, because and that's also part of how I will do values work with my clients is once we figure out what your values are, I then have them do I call it a value statement, which basically it is like not the dictionary definition of what that word means. It's how that value shows up for you and what that value truly means to you. And I want them to put their own words to it and their own spin on it because that's where it really starts to get personal. Like one of my other values is freedom, and my version of freedom might look very, very different to somebody else's version of freedom. But that's what's kind of cool about it is because then that starts to be a really, really true representation of you. And it's like your compass. It's like your barometer for am I living life the way that I want to be living? And that's why a lot of us burn out. That's why I burned out is because I was following somebody else's version of success, somebody else's version of, what fulfillment was and what freedom was and what security was. And as soon as I sat back and was just like, okay, what do I actually value and what do those things mean? That's when I realized that, being a research scientist, that wasn't the right path for me. I don't know how I ever thought, I honestly don't think I knew myself very well. I don't think I don't know how I ever thought me sitting at a bench with a lab coat and goggles and latex gloves on and really not even needing to necessarily talk to anybody was ever going to be fulfilling for me. I really don't know how I thought that, especially what I do now. I literally coach and speak for a living.
And yet, I this is a topic that I find super fascinating because I often wonder how often we, as in the bigger
Mhm.
ourselves, the bigger me, shut my own damn brain off so that I learn the things that I need to learn to go where the big me, wants to go.
Mhm.
It makes me
Yeah.
wonder because, I look at my background. I was excellent in math, and I was excellent in all of these different
Mhm.
things. And then I ended up being passionate about communication, and I did awful in English.
But that's kind of what's fun about it is if you stop, I was very validation driven and validation seeking.
Mm.
I still to this day struggle even in my business with external validation. Like if I don't, get good feedback from a speaking client or like I'm not hearing like positive things from clients, I sometimes still struggle with that. But I also am infinitely more aware now that I can't make choices based on external validation because that was the first 25 years of my life was making
Mhm.
choices based on external validation and what everybody else thought was the right move for me. It's very easy to get stuck in that trap of external validation that you don't even spend time trying to know yourself and trying to become aware of yourself because I'm making my parents happy or I'm making, this my coworker who always says I don't know what I would do without you if you ever left. Like sometimes we make our decisions and our choices for those people when it's really really not true to who we are and we can get so it's like the people pleaser thing. We can get so comfortable in living for what other people are saying and how other people are validating us that we don't take the time to know ourselves. And
Mhm.
that's kind of why it comes back to like being burnout proof and building a burnout proof business is I really do think there's so many entrepreneurs and I was guilty of it very early in my entrepreneurial journey who are letting other people decide for them what their business should look like, what success means to them. Like it doesn't matter what success means to anybody outside of you. It's your business. It is what you are building for yourself. If it's not true to you, it's never going to satisfy you. It's never going to make you happy. It's never going to feel like it's enough.
So it's pretty easy to see how people can head into burnout when they're, in school or they're
Mhm.
working at a job for someone else, because those are often defined by someone else's
Yeah.
idea of what success is. So how do we watch for if we're building our business with that same
Mhm.
unhealthy mindset?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. And this is something that I've become really passionate about because ever since I've started as an entrepreneur, I have seen people give up on their dreams and quit their businesses because they were too burned out to continue. And this is where I feel like there's so many entrepreneurs that we literally trained a 9 to 5 for a 24/7. And I don't think that was ever the intention, because I feel like a lot of us did this because we wanted more freedom in our lives. Like
Mhm.
that's why we went down this path. So I want to answer this question in two ways, and hopefully this won't be a long-winded answer. But there's 4 different types of burnout to look out for. There's physical burnout, there's overwhelm burnout, there's emotional burnout, and there's boredom burnout. And I always throw the caveat in there. This is how I look at it. If you talk to another burnout coach, they may not look at it this way and they may not agree with it, but this is how I see it. And when it comes to the physical side of burnout, that's the side of burnout that we are a bit more familiar with. That's the exhaustion side of burnout. That's like no amount of sleep or rest is going to help me make me feel better. But it's also like the getting sick more frequently. Like if you're getting sick multiple times over a course of a season and that's abnormal for you, or it's taking you a month to recover from a cold and that's abnormal for you, that's a sign of physical burnout. And I usually find, speaking from experience, because I will be completely honest, I sometimes this makes me feel like I'm the worst burnout coach ever, but I honestly think I'm the most honest burnout coach ever. I did this to myself last fall. I was in a transition season where the speaking side of my business was really kicking up, and I didn't really have a grasp of how much was too much when it came to speaking. And one of the things that I was finding is that I was getting sick a lot. And the reason for that is, even though I wasn't working every day, I was in my business every day as I was preparing for these speaking engagements, or as I was traveling to these speaking engagements, or like I didn't make enough space to turn off. So I think that's a big red flag for a business owner, is if you
Mhm.
are working every day of every week. And I think it's okay during certain seasons to work 7 days a week, but that should not be your typical schedule, is to work every single day of every single week. Even if it's a little bit, even if it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I just have like 2 hours of work to do on Saturday, that doesn't count. If you're doing that every Saturday, that does count. Like we have to prioritize resting. And I know that seems very, very cookie cutter and obvious, but frankly, the physical burnout side is the stuff that is easy to do, but also the stuff that's very easy not to do. So
Mhm.
like very early in my business, and I broke this rule last fall, which is why I burned myself out. I did get into some physical burnout last fall. I feel like maybe a month ago is when I started to actually truly feel recovered from it. That's what I was doing, is I was making too many exceptions and I was working every single day of every single week. So what I've gotten myself into now is Saturday is a non-negotiable day off. And the only time I ever make exception to that is if I've taken another day off during the week.
Mm.
Like if I
Mhm.
had a Wednesday speaking engagement and I came back and I took Thursday completely off, then it's okay for me to do a little bit on Saturday, but only a little bit, because Saturday still needs to be a true, like, I try to consistently make that a day off. That has become a non negotiable part of my schedule. I only don't include Sunday in that because I tutor still. I haven't given up on my day job yet. I love my students a little bit too much. I feel for teachers. It's hard to let your students go. So I do support some of my students on Sunday, but I do not work my coaching and my speaking business on Sunday. It's my students. That's actually a whole other tangent. I do believe it's important for us to have multiple sources of fulfillment in our lives. I don't think your business
Mm.
should be your only source of fulfillment. And we can touch on
Mhm.
that too if we want to dive into that one more, but I'll just say that. So that's the physical burnout side of things. And that's the way I think is the most important thing for us to look for, is, are we working every single day of every single week? Because if you
Right.
are, red flag, you're building your business in a way that's going to burn you out. The overwhelm side of burnout, that is, analysis paralysis, an inability to turn off. And what it can often look like for a lot of people is a difficulty handling change, getting started, or even completing projects. Again, especially if it's very, very normal for you to be able to do that. You are very decisive. You are very much a go-getter, and you're always able to complete the project and, kick off the next project with ease. And then you suddenly can't do that. And what can often happen with a lot of entrepreneurs when it comes to overwhelm burnout and the things in their business that can lead to that, is the biggest thing I always tell them to look for is, does every single offer you have in your business require you? If every single thing that you are selling requires your bandwidth week to week, it requires time on your calendar week to week, that's also a dangerous way to build your business. You
Mhm.
can do it in a way that is very sustainable, but I caution entrepreneurs against having every single thing they're selling in their business be something that they have to have their hands in, because
Right.
that
So
is
that would
also,
be
yeah, go ahead.
maybe having use it like you had mentioned earlier, maybe having some of those technology things,
Yes.
being able to that like an email course or whatever else, or a membership
Mhm,
with all the videos already in there. So having
mhm.
something that doesn't require your presence, even though
Yeah.
it's still you, but it's not you live.
Yes, that's what I mean when I say it doesn't require you, is it doesn't require you to be in it live. Like, even I made the mistake when I started a membership in my business of thinking of it as being passive income. It is not passive income. It is recurring income, because yes, I do get income, monthly or quarterly from that, but I have to show up in that membership. That's part of the promise I made them. And I didn't think of it that way when I initially
Mm,
set it up. And that was a mistake that I made. I built my business initially. Here's like a what not to do scenario of I was speaking, I was doing one-on-one coaching, and then I had memberships. Those were three offers that, for those offers to run, I needed to be in it. I needed to be the face of it. It wasn't like, I actually feel like I would much rather have my membership be, for example, this is how to pivot it. I would much rather have my membership be like a subscription service. You are paying for access to things, and not
mhm,
necessarily me like having a weekly coaching session for the group. That is how I could remove myself from that and make it a thing where it doesn't require me. We need to
mhm.
have ways in our business. I'm a massive fan of passive income. We need to have ways in our business that we can make money without us actually having to be present in life. I think every
Right.
business should have that. And I know, because I used to be this person, I know there are people being like, but I can't do that in my business. You can. You absolutely can. We have to get a little creative. Sometimes we have to think outside of the box. And this is
Mhm.
probably the one time I will say, look to other people in your industry for inspiration. I generally won't say that, because then we start to compare and all sorts of stuff. But sometimes we need those ideas from other people of how have they done it? What have they done to create this?
Well, exactly. I'm a fan of saying you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to change the tires.
I love that expression. I might steal that expression.
I have no idea who I stole it from, but I am sure that I stole it from someone.
Well, I'll credit you if I steal it. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the overwhelm side of things too, there's so many different facets I can think of for entrepreneurs. So if every offer requires you, that's something that can create overwhelm. If you schedule this, actually, I probably should have said for physical burnout, if you schedule work first and personal life second, that can create physical and overwhelm burnout,
Mm,
because
mhm.
I literally said to somebody this morning, is I want to build work around my life, not life around my work. And I think
Right.
that is a really, really, really simple mindset shift that we can have to make sure that we are pouring into ourselves constantly, to make sure that we aren't constantly just like overworking without creating that sense of rejuvenation and recharging ourselves. That, I think, is another thing that a lot of entrepreneurs do wrong. We schedule oh, this is when I'm going to deliver this program, but we don't necessarily think about how that's going to fit in with the personal things in our lives, and if we can even fit in the personal things in our lives anymore. So just changing the order with which you schedule things. Such a simple way to shift that really gives you so much bang for your buck when it comes to running your business and running it in a sustainable way. And like, the other side of this too is, if your marketing is only social media, that I think is another thing that can kind of be a red flag for physical and overwhelm burnout for an entrepreneur. Because again, physical burnout, that's kind of another thing where running your marketing just with social media, you have to have your hands in that for the most part.
Mhm.
Unless you're somebody who has a VA who's really, really good at creating like graphics with just pictures of you. For a lot of us, social media marketing means that we have to be present in it, and we have to be in our, we have to be doing the Facebook lives, or like we have to be in our
Mm,
stories on Instagram or whatever it might be. And that's where social media can get really dangerous. One of the best things are, and social media marketing can get really dangerous. One of the best things I ever did for my business is actually SEO, because that brings me people, that brings me new leads in my business. And I don't do anything to do it. I just have good SEO on my website. If I do anything, it's literally I'll like create a transcript for my podcast and post it in my podcast show notes. That helps me maintain the SEO in my business. But I don't have to do anything day to day, week to week per se to
right.
keep my SEO and keep my rank high on Google. But that's one of the best, it's one of the biggest new lead generation strategies I have in my business. And it is a marketing strategy that I can use that doesn't require me to have my hands in. I'm basically encouraging people to, you shouldn't have to have your hands in everything in your business. If it,
Passive
yeah,
income, passive marketing.
passive income, passive. I'm a fan of passive. And I know for some people that feels like, I feel like I used to feel like it meant I was like cheating in my business. It's just you're working smarter, not harder. That's all it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm hearing too is, so you said there was physical overwhelm and emotional, and there was one more that you mentioned,
Boredom.
boredom. Yeah,
Mhm.
they can all kind of weave into each other because I mean, I've
Mhm.
experienced every one of these,
Me too. Me too.
every one of these, and I find that, um, like I've had it where it started out as emotional and moved into physical. It started
Mhm.
out as overwhelm and moved into physical.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
boredom. Okay, I want to chat a little bit about that one because as I look at this, I'm like, boredom was how I pretended I was resting.
And I actually, it's funny because I always joke that I'm team never bored. I have actually said, again, might ruffle some feathers, like only boring people get bored. But I'm also just like the queen of like I find all the ways to entertain myself, and I have 80 bajillion hobbies. Again, sometimes to my detriment. I like to be busy. But boredom burnout, where boredom burnout comes from, it's kind of an offshoot of emotional burnout. Like emotional
Mm,
burnout, especially for like a high achiever or an entrepreneur, it's tends to look like apathy and disinterest and frankly one of the most common signs I see of emotional burnout, we were talking about emotional exhaustion before. I cannot tell you how many clients I had come to me, and the biggest sign of burnout I see in them is being quick to tears. Like they can't even
mhm.
explain the situation that's going on in their life before they start breaking down into tears. And I will say that is different from like just having like an emotional moment with somebody who like you're just, we sometimes have happy tears because we cry out of gratitude for the people in our life. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those moments where like you're trying to explain a situation to somebody in your life and it is so stressful and so overwhelming that the tears just start coming and pour out of you. Those
So
moments.
my second divorce, that is where I feel that I landed in all three of those
Mhm,
buckets.
mhm.
Um,
When I was in
and
graduate school, I was in emotional overwhelm and physical, and it was exactly how you touched on it. It started, and I do believe this is usually how it works. It starts with one type of burnout, and then it usually creates other types of burnout out of that.
mhm,
I was emotionally burned out in graduate school. And I tried to, when we're emotionally burned out, we tend to numb. Like an uptick in numbing behaviors is another sign of emotional burnout. So I tried to numb by doing more. And what happened as a result of that is I got overwhelmed. I created overwhelm burnout in trying to fix my emotional burnout because I didn't know how to fix it. And then as a result of being overwhelmed, I got physically burned out. So I had all three of those going on when I was in graduate school. I wasn't bored, but I had all three of those going on. Now, where
mhm.
boredom comes into play, boredom burnout is an offshoot of emotional burnout. But the reason I separate it is the causality is super different. When you're in boredom burnout, it's usually because you feel like you're going through the motions. Like there's no challenge, there's no stimulation. Stress is not inherently bad. Stress is actually incredibly, incredibly adaptive. And when we are in a little bit of stress, that's actually a good thing. Optimum performance happens when we're being pressured a bit, when we're being stressed a bit. Where boredom burnout happens is there's not enough pressure. There's not enough stimulation. And that can
Okay.
happen to entrepreneurs and business owners as probably more an entrepreneur or a business owner that's kind of overcome the hump of like needing to scale their business. Their business has scaled, but now they're kind of like, well, but now what? Like now what do I do?
Mhm.
I was at a conference this week, like I mentioned, and the gal who leads the conference had mentioned a couple times that she was really scared of her business getting boring because she had one primary offer. She's very successful. That often is then what can happen. And what boredom burnout then looks like, how we fix boredom burnout really is by injecting more of that stimulation. Maybe you are at the point where you can start offering something new or something different in your business. That thing that you've kind of always wanted to create and offer, but it never quite seemed like the right time. When you're in boredom burnout, maybe it's the time to do that. Maybe it's the time to learn that new skill. Full transparency, I started speaking in my business because I was bored with coaching. I'm no longer bored with coaching. I think I was coaching the wrong clients at the time, but I was bored. Felt like I was having the same conversations. It was like the same thing day in, day out, and I wanted something different. And it's really funny now with speaking because I actually do the same talk all the time with speaking, but it's so different each time because I never know what the group's going to latch onto. I never know what questions they're going to ask or where we're going to go. And I love that about speaking. Also, I get to travel, which is fun. I enjoy that. So like,
That's cool. I'm this kind of ties back to one of our previous guests where he was talking about marrying the brand and not the product.
mm,
Because what if Nike made the same pair of runners over and over again? Yeah, that would be boring. So
mhm,
they're always adapting and modifying and tweaking it and
mhm,
growing it because I know that my target will shift. How I present to them is going to shift, mainly because I'm evolving. My clients will be evolving, so why wouldn't my
mhm,
products be evolving as well,
mhm.
right? So that makes a lot of sense. Now we've actually gone 10 minutes over.
Oh my gosh, have we? Oh, I'm so sorry.
That is okay. Yeah, there was so much good stuff in here for our community that I really wanted to kind of get to the end of, or closer to the end
Yeah.
of what we were talking about with respect to the types of burnout, because I think it was a really important conversation
Mhm,
for us to get into. And this is going to be really good for those people who are not only already in their businesses, but the ones who are looking to create their businesses so they can actually start
mhm,
designing with this in mind as they're
mhm.
creating it. So I think this has been a really valuable conversation. So where do our community members find you? I know you're in the community, but
I
what's the
am.
best way for our people to find you?
Yeah, the best way I'm Coach Ellen everywhere, and you can see it on the screen, but I'm going to spell it. It's Ellyn. I do spell my name weird, but I'm Coach Ellen everywhere. CoachEllen.com is my website, but the places where I've been showing up the most and frankly enjoying showing up the most recently have been Instagram, though I do admit Instagram's kind of my like, that's the more of the fun place. That's like, if you really want to get to know my personality, go check me out on Instagram because I literally had to wake up this morning for a podcast interview and I had a dance party in my kitchen and I recorded it and I posted it on Instagram. So if you want to get to know my personality, Instagram's a great place to do it. If you really, really want to get to know burnout, what burnout looks like, how burnout might be impacting you and showing up for you, I share a lot of that on LinkedIn. I do share that on Instagram, but Instagram's kind of my fun place. So those are probably the best two places. And I'm Coach Ellen, again, Ellyn on both of them.
Perfect. Perfect. So, for those of you who are in the community that have been watching live, sorry I haven't been checking out your comments. I will be going into the community and taking a look at those after the fact. Love to hear what the biggest takeaway was from you and put that in the comments.
Mhm.
And both Ellen and I will go take a look at that.
Yes.
And for those of you who are going to watch this out in YouTube land, come on over to Heartrepreneurs with Terry Levine on Facebook. You can join our community. You're going to be able to connect with some really wonderful heart-based business owners like Ellen, like myself, like Terry. There's a wonderful community here, and we would love to have you. Thank you so much for your time, Ellen. This was a
Thank you.
fantastic conversation.